All right. Okay. Hi, everyone. So I think we are going to go ahead and get started. So first off, thank you all for being here today. I know and Empower Idaho knows that there's a lot going on within our community and just within everyone's personal life. So we really appreciate you all spending some time with us today to talk about health at every size. My name is Claudia Ordonez Landry. I'm the project coordinator for Empower Idaho. Empower Idaho coordinates educational activities both online and in person and advocates on behalf of adults with behavioral health conditions and their family members with the purpose of helping to improve the behavioral health delivery system of Idaho. So just a few housekeeping things before I introduce our speaker. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, please use the question or the chat box on the side of your screen. We'll be taking breaks every once in a while to answer some of those questions, so definitely feel free to use that. We'll also be sending out an evaluation once the webinar ends, so if you're able and have a few minutes, please fill this out. These evaluations help us identify what we can do to improve and provide better trainings in the future, just for you all. So this webinar will also be recorded and accessible for your reference. So now I would like to introduce our presenter today, Danielle Basye. Danielle is an dietitian and registered yoga teacher. She graduated with her undergraduate degree at University of Idaho and is working towards completing her graduate degree in science and nutrition at Idaho State University. She completed her 200-hour yoga teacher training and maintains her yoga registration with Yoga Alliance. Danielle was born and raised in Boise and naturally enjoys spending as much time as she can outside. When she isn't working or fighting diet culture, you can find her reading a good book or watching a 90s sitcom. You may find Danielle on Instagram at _gently_nourished_. I'll put that in the chat box as well so you can go follow her. So now I will pass it on to Danielle.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Well, welcome everyone, and thanks for joining me in lunch today. As Claudia mentioned earlier, we know you guys are busy, and so we really appreciate your time and interest in learning more about health at every size for healthcare providers. So we'll go ahead and get started. Okay, so a little more about me. As Claudia mentioned, I'm a dietitian. I'm an anti-diet dietitian, which is a mouthful, but I'm really proud to be anti-diet. I work here in Boise, Idaho, and work with those suffering from disordered eating, chronic dieting, and other disordered eating behaviors. And I've had the joy of doing that for the last almost 3 years, but it's been a passion of mine for a very long time, not only with my own struggles with eating issues, but it's just a population that I'm really passionate about. I also am a yoga instructor, like Claudia mentioned, and I really try to create an environment to provide yoga for all bodies and all sizes, all abilities, because it can be a really intimidating environment. So I pride myself in trying to create the best environment that I can to make yoga accessible for all. I also have a blog and Instagram page called Gently Nourished, and I'll give my contact information at the end so we can connect. I love finding like-minded community members and providers, so please feel free to reach out. I'm a Boise native. I used to want to leave, but now I can't imagine living anywhere else, as I'm sure those of you who live in Boise know what a special place we have here. And I just have to shout out to my dog, Junie. She's 1 year old. So that's a little bit about me in a nutshell to hopefully give you a better picture of who I am as a person and a provider. So we'll go ahead and get started. This is my second webinar, so I really encourage interaction. I'm used to talking in person, which I know is not an option right now, but I love talking with people, and I love people being curious about what I'm talking about and having questions. So please use the chat box. I can't see the questions, so Claudia will read those, and I'll stop periodically throughout the presentation to answer any questions, curiosities that you might have that pop up. Okay. So here's some of our objectives today, and I'll be looking, I have two screens. One screen has some things on it, so my eyes veer off. It's because I'm looking at the screen that I can see the whole slide. So some of our objectives today are I want to be able to explain some of the health at every size principles. I want you guys to be able to identify and understand weight neutral terminology because language is a big part of the health at every size movement. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the misconceptions about health at every size, some interventions, some evidence-based interventions to combat weight stigma, understand the psychological and physiological effects that dieting has, and understand some research outcomes from health at every size so that you have tools if this is something that you'd like to implement in your practice so that you feel confident in these areas. All right, so as I mentioned before, terminology is a huge part of the health at every size movement, revolution, whatever you want to call it. And basically what we're trying to achieve with the health at every size perspective is returning to patient-centered language. This has been a huge, I've only been working in the healthcare industry for almost 6 years, but this has been a huge shift and something that a lot of providers are trying to change is the way that we talk and discuss about patients, not only in front of them, but with colleagues as well. And some of the terminology I want to talk about today so that we can distinguish when we talk about weight loss versus health promoting behaviors. And I mentioned this last week in my presentation that you'll probably hear me say health promoting behaviors only about 500 times during this presentation. So I apologize for that. But if I want you to take anything away from this presentation is remember health promoting behaviors. And so basically some of the terminology, and when we talk about health at every size, we can't not mention diet culture. And so a lot of the terminology we are using is to kind of combat that dieting culture. And Christy Harrison is an amazing dietitian, and I want to give her credit because underneath the combat diet culture, the bullet, this is her definition of diet culture. And I'll talk a little bit about Christy Harrison later on because she's a great resource also. But she defines it as a culture and one that worships thinness, a culture where weight loss equals higher status, one that demonizes a certain way of eating and oppresses people who don't fit into that ideal. So basically the culture we're living in, right? So there's a lot of morality around body size, food choices, and how people prefer to pursue health for them. And so basically in this, as we're fighting diet culture with health at every size, this is kind of the culture we're fighting against. We're not against dieters, but we're against a culture that makes people feel like they have to do this, and a culture in one that suppresses and stigmatizes people who don't necessarily fit into this very small ideal of what we think health is. So some of the terminology, and these are the ones that just come up in my practice often, and some of the ones I've noticed other people using. So when we're talking about body size, the ones that we are more preferable are person at a higher or lower weight, as we describe people, person with a larger or smaller size body, someone who is full figure, petite, plus size, someone who is in a small or large frame, or someone who's at the higher or lower end of the weight spectrum. It's not lost on me that in healthcare, I recognize that when we document, especially in medical charts, we're doing referrals, that the BMI scale is very much used in a diagnostic tool and is required for notes. So something that I've learned in my practice is instead of saying underweight, overweight, normal weight, or obese, saying someone who's suffering from obesity, someone who has obesity, because I recognize that in journal articles and the science world, insurance world, I do recognize that some of those terms have to be used. I put fat on both sides of the spectrum because there is a big fat revolution as well of taking back the power of that word, because historically it's been a very negative word, right? We use that word to hurt people. We use that word as a derogatory way of calling someone fat, fat shaming people. And so I put it on both sides. For me personally, the word fat has no energetic charge. So I feel comfortable using that term, but where I want to have more compassion and understanding people's experiences, that term has been very hurtful for a lot of people, especially in bullying situations with peers, partners, things like that, that I want to be conscientious of having that conversation about what descriptive terms people prefer. And most of my clients prefer person at a higher or larger body or smaller body or in a higher weight or lower weight. because for them, it's still a very sensitive word. So it's not one that I use in my practice, but I don't mind using it outside of my practice because, again, I've taken the negative energy away from that word from myself doing my own work. Okay, so the definition of health at every size, and if you notice that health at every size has a registered trademark by it, and I've tried to do it with all of them, but I'm sure there's some that I missed. ASDA, the Association for Size Diversity in Health, actually did a registered trademark on health at every size a few years ago because they wanted to make sure that this term, this title was used in fighting diet culture and it wasn't misused for anything else. So that's why they went ahead and did that. So currently they own the trademark on health at every size. And so a lot of the definitions and information that I have came from ASDA. So I'll give you that resource in this presentation as well. So health at every size is defined as supporting people and adopting health habits for the sake of health and well-being, period, right? So instead of focusing on weight control, this movement is solely creating access to health promoting behaviors for all bodies, regardless, without the focus being on weight, which is something that's very different from our traditional weight-centric healthcare system. And so health at every size, it's taken many shapes and forms over the years, but I just want to acknowledge and give credit to all of those who've been fighting this really all the way back until the 60s and maybe even before, but it really took a stance with that activism in the 60s, specifically for women of color, people in larger bodies during that time really had an uproar with that activism in this time. And again, it's taken different roles and different shapes throughout history. More recently, it's known because Linda Bacon, she goes by Lindo now, but previously Linda, Bacon wrote a book called Health at Every Size several years ago, and that's really what most people are familiar with regarding health at every size at this time. Okay, so we're going to go through each principle, and again, these principles were created by ASDA, which that's their logo down there, and that's a great resource for health at every size information. They have not webinars, but conferences or educational get-togethers, resources for that. So the principles we're going to be going through are health enhancement, weight inclusivity, respectful care, eating for well-being, and life enhancing movement. This is really passionate for me because as a provider, the first thing that we should be doing is causing no harm. And unfortunately, in our weight-centric world, we're causing a lot of harm, both physiological and psychological harm. However well-intentioned it may be to not cause those things, we just know the science is there to back it up, that the way that we're in a weight-centric provider can be really harmful. So the health at every size principles really help us navigate how do we change that and challenge that to have a more compassionate role in the healthcare system. Okay, so the first one principle is health enhancement. And this principle, defined by ASDA, is to improve the access to information and services for physical, mental, social, spiritual well-being. And so our world tends to focus a lot of attention and awareness in the physical part of health, but we know that health is multifaceted, right? So my favorite definition when I talk to clients, because again, most clients or all the clients I see are very focused on the physical aspect of health. The World Health Organization defines health as a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and it's not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. So what I hear from that is, we really need to be looking at the full picture of health. One can be potentially pursuing behaviors that promote physical health, but in that process, their mental and social health decline. And to me, that's not well-rounded or well-faceted. And in fact, the psychological, social harm that can come from that really outweighs the other health-promoting behaviors that one might pursue for physical health. And really, it's individualized, what's important to them. I have clients make a health wheel, like a pie chart, and I have them create in each little pie chart what areas of health are important for you. And I even had one client put wanderlust health because for her, traveling was part of her health and well-being. And so it really, again, is individualized, and they all might not be the same, take up the same space, but the idea is that they're balanced and kind of all living together in synchronicity. And so I really like talking about that definition because I think it's really important, and we've kind of lost focus as a society about, what area. We're not really looking at the well-balanced picture. So that's one of my favorite definitions that I talk about a lot. Health Enhancement is also supporting health policies that improve equal access and information, because we know that there's a lot of barriers that prevent that for some people. So those are also really important to take into consideration as well. Okay, so I'd just like to put up this little graph. It came from a study done in 2010, and it just looks at the mortality rates of different ailments. And so what we look down at the bottom is BMI lean versus obese people, and at the top, there's social relationships, smoking cessation, alcohol consumption. And so we really, again, this just supports that we need to be looking at all aspects of health rather than just really focusing on a weight-centric area, because there's so much more that encompasses and affects our health that we don't take into consideration. Okay, so this came from an ASDA slide, but I just like to put it up. Hopefully you guys all know who Paula Deen is. She used to be on the Food Network. I don't think she is anymore for some controversial issues that came up, but I like to use this example because several years ago, Paula Deen was diagnosed with diabetes. And so when that happened, a couple of things fell into place as a result of that diagnosis. So for one, she received medical care, right? She went to her endocrinologist, her primary care doctor, and so she was being monitored on a regular basis, was put on some medication, right? She also doubled up on vegetables and began using healthier cooking methods. So for those of you who aren't familiar, Paula Deen lives in the South, and in the South are very known for their delicious, high-fat fried foods that are amazing, comfort type foods. But she began to change a few things and using different cooking methods to support her health. She also began to walk every day, and in that process, she lost 30 pounds. So her diabetes improved and feels great. And why is this? Well, society kind of capitalized on the fact of she feels great because she lost weight, right? So we're not really taking into consideration, or it's not in the forefront of, she did all these really great things for herself. She started walking, she received medical care, she changed some nutrition things that supported her health. But our society is so weight focused that a lot of times when we talk about health being improved, weight loss gets all the credit. But what should be getting the credit and what we should be focusing on are the behaviors. Because weight is not a behavior. And so if we want to make behavior change, we have to focus on the behavior itself. So I think this is really interesting. But I also like to bring up, for those of you who aren't familiar with diabetes or diabetes diagnosis, extreme weight loss is often one of the first indicators, or the last indicator before getting a diabetes diagnosis, is significant weight loss. For those of you who watch Dance Mom, it was a popular show back then, but there was a dance instructor who lived in a pretty large body, and she went through a pretty significant weight transformation. And part of that was health was in decline. So her diabetes was out of control for her, which resulted in weight loss. So you look at these two women who have a diabetes diagnosis, and we focus on both like, oh, they look great, they lost weight. We can't tell by looking at them who is healthier and who is not, because one person was really struggling with her diabetes and one person was managing it, and we're just focusing on the weight loss component itself. So I kind of like to compare these side by side also for two women who are suffering from diabetes, and what we as a society and our media focuses on is only the weight loss component, but we're missing that big picture. Okay, and this is just, if you work with clients, you could do this in a therapy role, a medical role. I kind of like to have just this idea of health, of like our diet affects our health, physical, emotional, social, spiritual, and kind of just show a visual aspect of there's so many facets to our health, which I already talked a little bit more about before, but I kind of just like putting it in perspective of how many areas of health there are that we should be focusing on, and not merely the physical or the weight piece itself. Are there any questions so far, comments?
No questions right now. And then yes, just a reminder, you can use the chat box or the question box on the side of your screen if you have any.
Awesome. Okay. All right, so moving on to the next principle or step in health at every size is weight inclusivity. So we're shifting again from a weight normative versus a weight inclusive approach. And essentially what that means is instead of normalizing that we focus on weight, we want to have a weight inclusive approach, meaning that people in all body shapes and sizes deserve to have equal access, opportunity, and respect in healthcare, and coming at it from that approach as providers. The definition that ASDA has is accepting and respecting the inherent diversity of body shapes and sizes and reject the idealizing or pathologizing of specific weights. So again, this all goes back to the weight stigma piece of just because someone lives in a smaller body doesn't necessarily mean that they're healthy or deserve, different treatment options than someone who's in a larger body suffering from the same things. This is being able to recognize and honor our genetic blueprint. I always give a shout out to my mom. Although our weights are different and they've fluctuated throughout our life, our body types are very, very similar. And so if my mom and I were to stand side by side, you're like, yeah, that's your genetic code. That's what your mom looks like. And so it's very highly likely that you're going to look like this because I have a set of genes and my genetic blueprint that predetermine the way my body is at its most comfortable. Just like we wouldn't expect someone who's like me, who's 5'3", to be 5'7", we need to think about that in the same way as we're looking at genetics when we're talking about weight and body shape or size. For a lot of us, we're very familiar with the BMI, and I think it's coming out more and more that it's not the best approach to health or to measure health outcomes. It's a very inaccurate tool currently used in healthcare. It was never meant to be a diagnostic tool, which it has very much come to be that. It was created in the early 1800s by a man who had many hats and roles. He, I believe, was a statistician, an astronomer, not in the healthcare industry, but he created this equation that looked at body mass index of trend, or for trends of populations. It was never meant to be used individually, but now we do use it individually, and so it's become a problem because we're really diagnosing it. It's easily accessible, it's free, it can be done anywhere, and so that's why it's a really used tool because of those things. But unfortunately, we've really demonized BMI. It could be one part of the tool, but we're so focused on that as a society because that's where weight comes into play. So what some people might not know is that in 1998, they actually changed the BMI standards. And so Lindo Bacon talks about this in her book called Body Respect, and in her book Health at Every Size, because she actually was involved or was working with some people who were involved in this change. So in 1998, the World Health Organization and the National Institute of Health had two different ranges for weight, and they wanted to have something that was more that conformed with one another. So I can't remember which one changed, but one of them changed. I think it was the World Health Organization changed to match the NIH, changed their definition. It was the other way around. I can't remember exactly, so don't quote me. One of them changed to conform to the other, and this was not based off science. This was just simply based off we want to have a scale that matches. And so they changed that, and overnight, millions of people had a change in weight category, especially if they were living on the end. So people who went to bed a normal weight woke up overweight. And so we need to take that into consideration as well when we're talking about this so-called obesity epidemic of, where are these numbers coming from? And, look at how we're changing the tool, the ranges, the significant impact that could potentially have. So that I just kind of like to talk about that. And I also like to talk about the fact that I'm not aware of many things that we still use or from the early 1800s that haven't changed that we still use in healthcare. It was created in the 1800s, but it wasn't readily used in the healthcare system until in between the 50s and 70s. So I just like to talk about that of how, as a society, for how much we've progressed in medicine, we should be able to look at other tools to determine healthcare or determine health outcomes. Okay, so this next one, respectful care. So ASDA defines this as acknowledging our biases and working to end weight discrimination, weight stigma, and weight bias, and provide information and services from an understanding that socioeconomic status, race, gender, sexual orientation, age, and other inequities impact weight stigma and support environments that address these inequities. So this comes up all the time in the healthcare system. There's a lot of privilege that comes along with health and nutrition that's not talked about a lot. And so these are really important to understand as a provider, especially working with a wide variety of any of these areas that I listed, from socioeconomic status to age. So we need to be looking at these inequities and really providing respectful care that aligns with the people that we're working with their values and what they have access to. And when we're coming up with health plans, whatever that may look like, I don't know if there's physicians on here, therapists, other dietitians, but when we're talking about creating plans and supporting the people that we're working with, being respectful and addressing these inequities is super, super important. One, that helps build self-efficacy. So if I'm recommending, a meal plan that's, filled with $50 juice cleanses and, going to the boutique workout studios to a mom who lives in has a lower income, a single parent with 3 kids who has 3 jobs, as a provider, I'm failing her to understand her life circumstances and inequities. And, the plan I come up with is not going to support that. So I love, just having a lot of respect and empathy for the people that we work with. Another part of that respect that I always take into consideration of we aren't experts of other people's bodies or lived experiences. And again, taking that into account when we're working with people is extra, extra important, especially if you live in a thinner body, really coming to the understanding and listening to people who live in larger bodies and how they've been treated in the world and how we can help them improve their health is super important. Part of that respectful care, when I mentioned the beginning of acknowledging our own biases, for treatment providers, it's so, so, so important to have supervision or a safe space to process our own biases. We all have them, right? We all lived in the same society of, a weight-centric approach to health. We all lived in a very diet culture and thin ideal pursuing type culture. And so those beliefs are very deep rooted, right? We learn that in school, we learn that from our peers, from media. And so supervision, I always recommend, especially if you're wanting to shift towards a more health at every size approach, is such an important piece of that puzzle for providers. So I just wanted to throw that out there, that I hope you guys all have access or ability to have that supervision space. Or even talking to colleagues too is really helpful and important. Okay, so the next slide I have here is eating for well-being. And this is probably my favorite one because I'm a dietitian and I enjoy food and talking about food. So the ASDA defines it as promoting flexible, individualized eating based on hunger, satiety, nutritional needs, and pleasure, rather than an externally regulated eating plan focused on weight control. And basically this little chunk here encompasses all of what intuitive eating is. And if you've never heard of intuitive eating or you want more information, they filmed the webinar I did last week where I talked just the basics about intuitive eating. But I'll also give you some resources where you can look that up for yourself if this aspect of health at every size resonates with you. So we really need to start using nutrition as a tool rather than a weapon. I'm a dietitian. I think there's great healing powers in food, but we really weaponized it, demonized, and there's a lot of morality around it. And so we really need to go back to the basics of we have all this access to information, right? Ever so much in this day and age, can I Google, diabetic management in Google Scholar and come up with more than I can even comprehend, journals about, all the latest science, what people all over around the world are doing. And so we need to be using that information as a tool to help promote health and expand health in people's lives rather than confining it and creating a more rigid and fear-based space to live. People love black and white, right? We're humans. Nutrition's an ever-evolving science, and people really don't like that, right? I was born in the early 90s, just rolling out of the fat-free era, and here we are now, a really keto-based, where carbs are demonized and fat is promoted. So it's ever-evolving. We're constantly learning new things, and it's not an absolute, which people don't like either. And so there's a lot of people, suffering around the world who are like, I don't know what to eat, I don't know what to do. And so we really have to unpack that with our patients as providers for ourselves and them. And so I also really like to acknowledge that food is so much more than nutrition. Food provides so much more than macronutrients, protein, vitamins, and minerals. It's part of our culture. It's part of love and nourishment. And so we really, have to honor that part of the nutrition in food as well, because if we don't, we're missing a really, really important part. That there's so much more that we get from food than just the nutrients that are in our body. So that's something that hopefully you notice that I'm super passionate about, is the nutrition part of it. I'm passionate about all of it, but I love the food. Okay, so in this food piece, I kind of just like to talk about, why are we addressing food in this certain way? And so we have a lot of research showing, there's a rhyme to our reason, right? We're not just the minority of like, throw out the diets, right? So there are some dangers that come along with dieting. And as a provider, I try really hard not to harm my clients. And so this is why I have this approach that I do. So the dieting industry is an over $65 billion a year industry. That's the baseline. I've heard people calculate more depending on what you include, and this number continues and continues to rise. So it's a big industry, right? This includes weight loss surgeries, diet commercials, diet contraptions. This kind of encompasses that whole realm of an industry of weight loss. But the caveat is, so it's a very large industry with a 95% failure rate. If there's any physicians on here, I don't even know if a medication can get approved for the FDA if there is a 95% failure rate. So there's a really great doctor who wrote the book, Eat What You Love and Love What You Eat, and she was a practicing physician in primary care, and she got out to kind of talk about some same principles, and she's like, how could I keep prescribing weight loss to my clients when I knew there was a 95% failure rate? She's like, I would never prescribe a medication or another realm modality to treat something if I knew that was the outcome, right? And so what this 95% failure rate means is that 3 to 5% of dieters, only 3 to 5% of the dieters maintain significant weight loss. So the rest of people, they might yo-yo, they might be at a lower weight, but most people gain the weight back or plus some. So dieting and yo-yo weight lossing is a predictor of higher weight gain and higher weight gain and higher BMI, regardless of the starting weight. And so when we talk about like that the weights overall in the world are trending up, I'm really curious to, no one's taking into account of the significant dieting that's happened, because it does wreak havoc on the metabolic system. So one, it decreases our metabolic rate, right? Our body's one and only job is to keep us alive. The caveat with that is our body doesn't know that it's bikini season. It doesn't know that you're getting ready for your 10-year or your family reunion or your 20-year high school reunion. So what it sees is a perceived threat. And so if you continue to restrict and put your body in that starvation state, your body is going to combat against that of like, oh, wait, we've done this before, and this is how we're going to combat that. If I'm going to slow down the rate at which you metabolize things, slow down the functioning of your body to help protect you and keep you alive. Which many people don't take into consideration, right? We're kind of the idea of, if you restrict and put your body in starvation state, your metabolic rate could increase, which is not the case. Yo-yo weight loss and chronic dieting actually has been shown to change body shape and size just based off the way that your body distributes fat as a protective mechanism to keep you alive. Dieting also decreases the trust that you have in your body. We were all born intuitive eaters, unless there was other medical conditions or other developmental issues that arose. But I like to give the example of, if any of you have fed an infant, seen an infant being fed, or a toddler, they cry when they're hungry and they stop when they're full, right? So if you try to feed a full infant, they turn the head away from the nipple or breast. They spit food out, they might whine or cringe and move their head around as the loving parent tries to get them to eat more, or caregiver tries to get them to eat more. So we were born with this innate wisdom of our body does a pretty dang good job of regulating us and letting us know when there's issue. The problem is we've had a lot of barriers that have kind of gotten in the way of that ability to sense that awareness. And so we lose trust in our body at whatever point in age, and from a wide variety of factors. But dieting can definitely help or promote decreasing that trust you have in your body. And obviously something I'm really passionate about is dieting is a huge risk factor for developing a clinically diagnosable eating disorder or developing disordered eating traits significantly, especially with adolescents. So that's something I'm really really passionate about, and I think is important that we need to be talking about, what are we promoting, especially to our young men and women, because eating disorders do affect men. There is a part of dieting culture that's, promotes dieting in men, so we have to take that into account as well. On the right-hand side, I kind of just throw these for a laugh. People are saying, weight loss is for health, it's for health. Well, up in the right-hand corner, the Slim Fast commercial of, well, this weight loss is all about bikini season. And the one below it was an ad in the 50s of Get Your Man Diet, which has something to do with your health. In the bottom left-hand corner, this was actually an ad a client found for me in a 1970s National Geographic magazine, just to show how our dieting industry has changed. That in the 70s, people were actually promoting eating cookies and ice cream, or in fact a tablespoon of sugar, to help keep your cravings away, so that when your blood sugar dropped when you were hungry, that would provide a fast rise also. And then just the one above that, I just like to show of the excessive means that we're going to help people lose weight. This portion controller belt has like a ball on the inside that makes it so uncomfortable and so painful to eat that you don't want to eat. And so I just like to say, you know, to me, that's pretty dangerous. And there's a plethora of other things on the out there that cause harm and damage that are kind of crazy. And if you want to know more, I did write a blog post on my Gently Nourished blog about some of the craziest, wackiest diet trends I've ever seen, and a lot of them are pretty harmful. So if you're interested in that, you can check that out. That's another resource. Okay, so I also like to throw in the Ansel Key Study. I wish I had learned this in school, but unfortunately I didn't and had to learn on my own. But this is where a lot of what we see, some of the psychological and physiological issues with dieting come into play. So the Ansel Key Study was done in the 1940s after World War II, and what they were wanting to learn was they had all these veterans coming home, and they needed to know how to refeed these veterans. So these were veterans who were prisoners of war, who hadn't eaten in a long time, were really, really malnourished, and what they were finding is when they were refeeding the veterans, a lot of them were dying, and as we come to find out later down the road, that was due to refeeding syndrome, which the presentation is too short to talk about today, so I'll kind of talk about this. So this study looked at some of the psychological and physiological damages of decreasing caloric intake, and we see all these things now. So we know that even in the 1940s, when there wasn't Instagram, there wasn't Snapchat, the Kardashians weren't alive yet, that we see all these physiological and psychological issues that come up when we decrease our caloric intake. And if you're interested more about this, because I want to stay on time, you can send me an email and I'll get you a study that talks more about this, because what's really interesting in this study is that a lot of the caloric intake or restriction that happened really wasn't even that low. Like I think some of the men were on 1,300 calories per day, and they still were experiencing some of these symptoms. It was pretty interesting, and some of the interesting things that came from it, of a lot of men were using behaviors to subside hunger. Like some men were drinking 40 cups of coffee a day, 15 packs of gum a day, and we see a lot of that in eating disorders and dieters of trying to suppress that hunger. So it's a really biologically based response to starvation that we see even in our society today. And hopefully we can get you the slides so you can read the bullet points of some of the effects that happen from that dieting. Okay, the last one is life-enhancing movement. So we want to support physical activities that allow people of all sizes and abilities and interests to engage in enjoyable movement to the degree that they choose. So movement is encouraged. It's important for the body, but we, again, have used such a fear-based approach to fitness that a lot of people, especially in larger bodies, who have been stigmatized for so long, are really fearful of moving their body in a way that works best for them. Strength can be built at any size. I had a client recently who lives in a larger body, and they kept telling her, lose weight, your back will feel better when you lose weight. I'm like, let's get you into a chiropractor or a physical therapist. Like, you can start building strength now. And lo and behold, her back pain has decreased. So, you know, we just want to remove any of those barriers that are only based off weight alone, that provide access to people to move their body, is essentially what this is. Okay, so some health at every size misconceptions. These are some of the ones that I come across in my practice, but I'm sure there's a lot more. So if you have any you want to bring up, please let me know. So health at every size is not anti-weight loss. It's just not the focus, right? So you might lose weight, or your body might change based off you promoting health or using health promoting behaviors. It's just not the focus. It's not something that's praised. It's just a pretty neutral fact. Like, oh, you lost weight, you gained weight, it stayed the same. We want to stay weight neutral. It's not anti-health, which some people think it is. The whole idea of health at every size is helping people find health-promoting behaviors that work for them to improve their health and well-being. It's not saying that exercise and nutrition never have an impact on health. We know that's not true. There are a lot of benefits to exercise. We want to remove the barriers so that all people can move in a way that's right for them. And we know that nutrition can have a big impact. But the caveat with that is that the values of food and nutrition are different for everyone. And so we need to acknowledge that and work with clients on what's important for them without using our own biases, our own values, and imposing those on people. It's not anti-medical nutrition therapy or anti-nutrition. And basically what that is, I've had clients who suffer from diabetes, and we've done this health at every size approach and an intuitive eating approach to food and wellness, and seen health markers. So that would just be like saying if someone has a peanut allergy, their medical nutrition therapy would be for them to not have peanuts or avoid foods that are contaminated with peanuts, right? So if you have a medical condition, we know there's a lot of research that supports that, some tweaks in nutrition and food can help support and manage that ailment for you without it being fear-based or really restrictive. It's not anti-science. Health at every size has been studied quite a bit. And, the things that we use to talk about health at every size are studied as well. So other facets that support health at every size have been studied also. And in fact, a health at every size approach are really critical to other research, right? So we want to look at, so we get a study that says like eating 10 almonds a day is good for you. Like we want to look at that research. We want to say, what was the population? Like, how do they get to this conclusion? And really use that in supporting, food and nutrition information that's helpful and not harmful. It's not saying that weight never has an impact on health. Again, the health at every size movement is helping people of all sizes find health promoting behaviors work for them. We know that weight can have an impact maybe on the lower end or higher end of weight. But again, the whole idea of this is to just help people find behaviors that work for them and make them feel better. Another misconception is that health at every size providers can't work with people who desire weight loss. If that was true, I wouldn't have a job because everyone I work with wants to lose weight. But hopefully we kind of unpack that, why are you wanting to lose weight? When you lose weight, what happens? What does that mean for you? And just kind of unpack that and, and sit with them in that fact that they want to lose weight because it's very natural, right? In the society we live in, it's pretty natural. And health at every size is not just for people in larger bodies. Again, it's an all-inclusive approach to health. Okay, so talking a little bit about weight stigma, and I'll try to get through these as fast as I can. So weight stigma is discriminating or stereotyping based on a person's weight. It impacts people of every size, although I do acknowledge that weight discrimination disproportionately harms people in larger bodies. It's often a barrier to eating disorder treatment. And again, it impacts people of all genders, races, socioeconomic status, and education. It does not discriminate. And when we talk about weight stigma, we can talk about both ends, that people are stigmatized in larger bodies, but people are also stigmatized in thinner bodies. That, again, thinner is better, larger is worse. And so we really have to take into account of both sides, but knowing that the negative stereotyping or discrimination does happen more often, and is typically more harmful to people of those who live in larger bodies. Okay, sorry. Okay, oh, there we go. Okay. All right, so weight stigma in healthcare. So oppression, we know oppression and discrimination have huge impacts on health. And Lindo Bacon put a good health rises in sync with socioeconomic status. And I believe that to be true for the higher the weight stigma, the worse the health outcomes. Some of the immediate effects of weight stigma that have been studied is that the physicians or healthcare providers spend less time with the patient. Even before going into the session or the appointment, there's a belief that they'll be less compliant. There's an increased negative experience, both with the provider and the patient. It impairs cognitive function and ability to communicate effectively from the patient perspective. Some of the long-term effects, going back to that of impairing cognitive function, for me, I'm really trying to decline being waited at the doctor's office. And I know for me, my anxiety just raises through the roof, even though I live in this world of health at every size. But to have that that feeling of threat come to you during a doctor's appointment, it really affects the ability of the patient to communicate with the provider what's really going on. A long-term effect of that is there's high levels of stress. We know that impacts health. People who have been experienced weight stigma in healthcare wait longer to seek out healthcare, right? Why would you want to go, into an appointment with a dietitian or a doctor or a physical therapist when the only thing that you're going to be lectured on is about your weight, right?
Danielle, sorry to
yeah.
interrupt you. There's a box in your screen. I don't know if can you see it on
Oh,
yours?
let me see.
Yeah, it was just a little pop-up box.
Away.
Oh yeah.
Okay. Let's see. Okay.
Sorry to interrupt. I just, wanted to get
No,
that.
you're fine. I forgot that you guys could see that. Okay,
It's okay.
let me. Okay, well now this isn't working. That's okay.
Maybe try the setting below where it says duplicate, or
I'm gonna do this. Sorry, guys.
we also have a question when you are ready for it.
Okay, perfect. I'll finish this slide and then, is that okay? And then I'll answer the question.
Yeah, that's great.
Okay, does the screen look okay?
Yes, you are all good to go.
Okay, and so long-term effect, they wait to seek out healthcare, and they tend to, seek out more weight-focused treatment, which we know and talked a little bit about some of the consequences of that yo-yo dieting. There's also an internalized stigma that happens, which has shown to have the greatest impact on health. Internalized stigma is basically that one believes they deserve that discrimination. So people in larger bodies believe that they should have that stigma upon them. They believe their body is bad. They see it as an identity threat and feel devalued because of that social identity. And again, they feel less confident to engage in health promoting behaviors. So when you talk about, it's just as simple as what you eat and how you exercise. Well, these people have been stigmatized, feel really don't have a lot of efficacy in the belief that they can promote these things on themselves. So that's just kind of some of the outcomes of the weight stigma that have been shown. Did you want to read the question, Claudia?
Yes, and then also on the screen now, so it has 2 other boxes on it just for the go-to webinar ones. If those can get moved to the side, it's okay.
That's funny. Okay, let me try. Okay. We were doing so well.
It's okay. Thank you all for your patience.
Yeah, I am technologically challenged. So.
Okay, that one's gone. Yeah, then there's that other one. Perfect. Okay. So the question, if you are ready, it's from Anna. So it says, hey, Danielle, thanks for the talk. As an RD, I see a lot of patients who have been withheld surgeries and procedures because they are told they need to lose weight first. Do you have any recommendations for helping patients in larger bodies overcome these barriers without forcing temporary weight loss that could be more harmful in the long run? Thanks so much.
That is such a hard question, and one that I struggle with myself because I have a lot of physician friends too who are very health at every size oriented, and they come across the same thing of, insurance companies want to approve weight loss surgery. And so that's a great question. So if anyone else has, I don't know how to answer that because I have not found a way to go about that. One thing that might be helpful is if you're working with this client, reaching out to that provider, kind of educating them on, like some of your philosophies and thoughts and, how can we improve health? If it's something that can be addressed through a physical therapy aspect that might improve to help build strength. But that's a really hard question and one that I have not yet found the answer to. So I apologize for that, but that's the hardest question anyone could ask me because that's a huge barrier. And I see that a lot of physicians refusing to see people based off their weight. So sorry, I couldn't answer that.
All right. Yep, then that is the only one that we have for now. Thank you.
Yeah. You could also explain to the provider, the provider of some of the side effects and like why pursuing a weight loss focused treatment might not be the best option for this client and why, and are there other options that can be had? So I think just like being able to communicate, I don't know if it's an insurance based thing like maybe they're like, well, they're in a high weight and their blood pressure's out of control, I can't do surgery, then saying like, okay, well, let's try to address, through the things that we know that help with blood pressure, such as movement and some dietary changes, and maybe they'd be more on board that way and have to have more context on why there was a refusal of surgery there. But it's definitely worth having a conversation, and would also help us understand from the physician perspective of why they aren't willing to do the surgery. So hopefully that's helpful. Okay. Oh, geez. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about some real life examples of weight stigma. So Linda Bacon, she likes to talk about in her book, her dad lived in a larger body and his problem was knee pain, and his treatment time and time again was being promoted weight loss. Lindo Bacon, who lived in an average size body, had that same knee pain, and her treatment was physical therapy, medication, and a wide variety of other modalities to help treat that pain. So her dad died with knee pain. He didn't die from knee pain, but he had struggled with this pain his entire life. When she, living in a smaller body, was able to have more access to other treatment modalities besides being told to lose weight. My sister, she told me and wrote to me that I could talk about this, who I love so much. So she lived in a larger body compared to her peers, and she's been told, the poor thing, on and off to lose weight since 7th grade. One, because we don't like people who live in larger bodies as a society, and two, she did have some gastrointestinal things. So she had heartburn and nausea and didn't feel good sometimes, and so she was told, you need to lose weight and those issues will go away. She once was told by a provider that she was really pretty but had a round face, and was referring to some of the benefits that would come from weight loss. This provider was also trying to sell her weight loss drugs at the age of 18. And again, going back to health should not be appearance-based. And when I work with clients, I don't say, you really should be eating this way because, you're really pretty, but if we change it, you would look like this, right? So, that just kind of goes to show, like, we really need to be going back to patient-centered care and really focusing on the symptoms at hand. No one ever really talked to her about lifestyle behaviors, and everyone she ever met with was like low carb, low carb, low carb. Little did they know, my sister was really struggling with some pretty severe mental health issues. She had some binge eating type behaviors, was really secretive and really ashamed of the way that she ate, really was not motivated to exercise based off, everyone shaming her entire life. She recently had lost weight at 21 years old due to a lifestyle change. She got the lovely opportunity of cleaning the dorms up at U of I during the summer, and it was a very physically demanding job. Her mental health was in the best place it's ever been. There were some family dynamics that had changed. She was really taking care of herself and focusing on, eating in a way that felt right for her. And in doing that, she had lost a lot of weight. But lo and behold, some of the nausea and heartburn did improve, but she continued to have the gastrointestinal distress. She received an endoscopy at the age of 21 and was diagnosed with gastroparesis. So something that she potentially could have been struggling with since the age of 13 that was ignored or put aside based off of her weight was finally diagnosed at the age of 21. So that's something that's always really close to my heart, and just shows the significant impacts and the potential harm we could be causing clients when we're only focusing on the weight. Okay, so sorry, we're running kind of short in time. So some of the research says that Hayes' approach improves diet quality along with psychological and emotional well-being. It's been shown to improve depression compared to the dieting counterparts. There's a decreased drive for thinness, increased body satisfaction, and body image perception disturbances. The dietary quality actually increased. So I think this is another thing that I hear a lot of. If you approach it from this way, people would just be eating donuts and cake and cookies. But in fact, when we give people more freedom to eat in a way that works for them, our body again has that innate wisdom to let us know like what sounds good, and their dietary quality change and increase for the better. Intuitive eating and health at every size people eat for physical hunger / satiety, and there's decrease distressful emotional eating. And there's actually been shown to have improvement in metabolic markers such as LDL, triglycerides, and total cholesterol. So as providers, some things that we can do, again, is paying attention to our language, looking at our own biases. We all have them and shouldn't be ashamed. To get past the barriers of our own biases, we have to talk about them. because we have those biases for a reason. Don't assume that someone in a larger body wants to lose weight. Really trying to shift the focus, not praising people for weight loss or assuming someone is doing well because they're losing weight. I hear this all the time of people. I had a friend who had a miscarriage and her weight naturally went down, and people were like, oh, how'd you do it? You lost this weight. And she was going through something pretty traumatic and emotional for her. Focusing on health promoting behaviors, again, rather than the weight loss. Approach care from a weight neutral approach. So we shouldn't be prescribing disordered behaviors in larger people compared to their thinner counterparts. And we should be looking at people and their symptoms and treating those. One example of this was a gal in Canada wrote in her obituary about her experience with weight stigma. And she had abdominal pain and she went to several providers and they said, lose weight, lose weight, lose weight. Finally, one provider did further testing and looked beyond her weight and found out she had stage 4 ovarian cancer or something, and she died several months later. And so she talked about in her obituary of, her experience and, how that might have been a different outcome if the providers had approached that from a weight neutral approach. Refer to a dietitian when necessary. If it's nutrition related, I always refer my clients out when they need deeper emotional work. And so referring to a dietitian when food things come up, because there's a lot of information out there, and a dietitian who comes from Health at Every Size or an intuitive eating approach is really helpful. Continuing education, having a really critical eye to research, and collaborate with your team. It's a holistic approach, so being in communication when you're working with a client, so that we're all on the same page is really important. Okay, so here's some resources for you. I won't go through all those, so you can answer if there's any questions. There's my contact information on Gently Nourished, and I have a blog, email, Instagram as well. And then I really wanted to end with this quote of Linda Bacon wrote this, or said this when I went to one of her conferences. And she said, empathy, respect, and humanity will foster better healthcare. And I so believe that. And not everyone is on board with the Health at Every Size approach, but I do think that there's one thing we can all agree on is treating people with humanity, respect, and empathy. And that in turn will, I think, improve, foster a better healthcare system. So thank you all so much for joining. I appreciate it. And I'll answer any questions. Sorry, it was slightly rushed at the end. I apologize. Sometimes I try to pack in too much. So is there any questions?
Well, thank you, Danielle. That was very good, very informative. I'm not seeing any questions at the moment. Maybe we'll just give it another minute and see if anybody has any last minute thoughts. Just a few things for everybody that's on here, some things that I sent in the chat. For Empower Idaho, we send out a newsletter twice a month, just with upcoming events and things that are happening in the community. If you'd like to subscribe to hear more about those things, the link is placed within the chat box. And then I also put a link to our survey. If you all would be willing to fill that out, we would so appreciate it, just so we can improve webinars like this, for instance, and other trainings, just so we can make it a better experience for everyone. I'm looking at the questions. I don't see another one right now. No, I think that's good. But thank you so much, Danielle, for being here. We loved hearing from you, and thank you all for attending today. Just again, we so appreciate you all spending your time with us. So thank you all again.
Thank you.